Well, welcome back. They decided to let us do another episode of the Dirt Exchange podcast. We're on episode 2.
Can't believe it, but yes, I can. Here we are, ready to country and roll.
Yeah. Well, we did the first one, obviously, and we did it in a pretty short time frame, so we learned a lot from that first one and things that we're going to do a little bit different, a little bit better. Hopefully you don't hear any road noise in this one or anything like that, but I just thought we'd kind of start talking about some commodity prices and some other hot topics that are facing everybody today, and kind of go from there. We do have a guest coming up as well, so
Sounds good. Well, why don't we just roll with it, Chris, and get into some of these commodity prices that you want to hit on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, soybeans, as of today, which is June 24th, they're up 6.5. Corn is up 3 1/4, and wheat rose to I think about 2 1/4. It's up in the 5.28 range, which you kind of touched on the last episode with everything that's going on in Russia and them being hot and burning up, that our export is going to grow on that a little bit, and it kind of looks like it does.
Let's hope that trend continues, and furthermore, we have some rough roads ahead of us, some rough weather ahead of us, and so forth. One thing I want to point out on as far as the prices go, hopefully they keep heading north.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of factors with that. Mother Nature being one of those factors,
Yep.
as she has been so far. But neither one of us are experts at making predictions.
Yeah.
If we were, we wouldn't be doing this today.
Right,
So,
right,
hey,
exactly.
Here we are.
Yep.
So, anyway,
What about the G20 summit that's coming up?
that's a good question, or a good point to be made. Like you had pointed out, today is the 24th of June. The big G20 summit, big economic powers are getting together 28th and 29th, which should matter somewhat to our ag economy,
Yeah.
our commodity prices and so forth. If they can get some trade going with China and some of these other economic powers, if we can export more of our
Yeah.
crop, I think we'll see. I sincerely think we'll see our prices go north.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime you can, get a group of leaders to a table and sit down and discuss it, that it's for the better in the long run. Now, there might not be that instant gratification. It might take 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, a year, whatever it may be. But obviously, the farmers, out there, the people who depend on this, the livelihood, our economy as well, will benefit greatly if these things keep going up. Know that they're working on it, and,
Yes.
and they're pushing for it. So it is a focus, which obviously nobody wants to be the forgotten soul, and in this case, they're not.
I agree.
So,
I agree. Good point.
Couple, I guess, topics I wanted to hit on, or I've been reading about that are kind of hot in the industry right now is you get a lot of talk about corporate farmers, family farmers, that kind of thing, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception there.
I agree with you, Chris.
I think people don't realize 97% of all farms are family owned.
Yes.
Now, you might have the father-son that does their farming, or you might have the family that has a CEO, and a vice president and that kind of stuff, that has 20, 30 employees underneath them that are ran more like a corporation. But at the end of the day, it's all, for the most part, family owned, operated. And the reason why that it is, and it has to be, I think, is there's so much that goes into becoming a successful farmer, or making a good go at it, is you have to rely on your knowledge of the local soil, the weather, pest conditions, because that can vary from spot to spot. Like, for instance, at your place, you have sandy river style soil. You drive
Yep.
30 miles to my place, and I have hard clay based
Big time clay. Yeah.
soil. So there's you approach those in a much different way.
And we're not that far apart. And,
Yeah.
So much agreed there.
Yeah.
So,
So in a prior life, you spent what, 20 years as a financial planner focused in the ag?
20 years as a financial planner, and 90% of my clientele was the farming and ag
Yeah.
and construction community.
So when these families are working on the farm and they're trying to run a business, because at the end of the day, it's a business, right?
Yes.
There's different laws in the books and estate taxes and that kind of stuff. What are some hot buttons for you, or some things that you might suggest, or that it's worth looking into and talking to their planner?
Well, I guess there's quite a few avenues to take, and one thing you hit on, Chris, is you had talked about bigger corporations and so forth, and the farming avenues, and the CEOs and the ladder, the corporate ladder and so forth, and a lot of that, and the 30 employees,
Yeah.
and that's great and so forth, because really the farmers have to structure. It's like the last podcast, whether they have 40 acres or
Yeah.
whether they have 20,000 acres, they truly have the tax laws on the book, they have the estate laws on the books, that they can create different entities
Yeah.
to be able to move their and move their farms into the next generation, in the current estate tax laws and so forth, and we need those laws to stay on the
Yeah.
books. And then there's different tax laws that concur with those estate laws. My dad's generation was able to move to my generation without paying, inheritance tax, estate tax.
Well, and I
certain
know
things like
in
that,
some places, like inheritance tax can be up to like 30%.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of money when you consider land, equipment, that kind of stuff that you'd be transferring over.
It can be huge, and it can be devastating. A big thing with these corporations, we just can't bring a suit
Yeah.
out to run our family farms.
Yeah.
It just can't be done.
Yeah.
They cannot do what our family farmers do.
Right.
And I guess my point to that is we have multi-generation family farms going
Yeah.
on right now. I'm talking third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation.
Yep.
And how has that been done?
Right. Well, trial, error, hard work, love, and caring.
And-
Because there's not a single person out there that's running a farm or a ranch or anything like that doesn't put their heart and soul into it.
Amen.
Because that's their livelihood. And without that, they don't exist. You've heard so many people from, going back into the 80s, they went through their bankruptcies and that kind of stuff, and they went to town and they got a job. But what did they end up going back and doing? They went back to farming, when that kind of, took care of itself, or they worked their way out of it. And they do that because they love what they do.
It's in their blood.
It's a different passion.
Farming is so cyclical,
Yeah.
and it's in their blood. It'll stay in their blood. But you go back to the 80s. I mean, I was there.
I was really little.
I'm old.
Yeah.
So as you first stated on the podcast, I did live through that period of time. And I remember the high interest rates. I remember the high inflation rates. I remember dealerships going out of the business, parting out pieces to sell,
Yeah.
to close out their businesses.
Yeah.
It was pretty devastating. They had to merge their businesses and so forth, and it was hard to borrow money. They had to really pinch their pennies at that time.
But the positive thing is, it didn't stop them.
It didn't stop.
It didn't hold them
at
down.
all.
And I think hopefully, obviously I'm a father, as are you, and we always want to instill different things in our kids, and we want them to have a better life than we did growing up, and that kind of thing. And something that I hope translates to this next generation is the passion for farming. Because again, people don't realize outside of the rural areas what farming means to our country, our economy. I mean, everybody's got to eat, right?
It's just amazing. Everything we put on the table comes from farmers.
Yeah.
What we put in our vehicles comes from farmers.
Yeah.
You name it, it comes
Yeah.
from farmers.
So I know that there's a lot of, guys that are looking to hand stuff down or have their kin come in and work with them. So bringing in that youth and kind of diversifying, what you're doing, makes sense, and obviously they're not going to do the same things, with this next generation as they did before. They're going to, figure out a different way of doing things, whether it be right, wrong, indifferent, better, worse, whatever. But you don't do the same things as your dad did, and I don't either,
No.
So there will be some sort of migration in how everything's done. So,
But speaking of and getting back to the multi-generation, we have had such a weird 2019
Yeah.
so far, all over the country.
yeah,
It's not just in the Midwest; it's all over the country.
yeah,
And there's a lot of uncertainty going on. And I'm not talking with the market. We've already talked about the uncertainty with the market, but I'm talking about, I've talked to people in the ag community, and I'm talking community,
Yeah.
Farmers and dealers and so
Yeah.
forth, that are uncertain. We talked about multi-generation, passing it to the next generation, and what I'm hearing from talking around the people around the United States and beyond,
Yeah.
north of the border and south of the border, is there really needs to be diversification. And we're starting to see a lot of diversification, and we're starting to see a lot of different education in the youth. As far as diversification, and I'm talking a lot of tech savvy young people
Yeah.
getting into this industry.
Well, and I can tell you this, my in-laws farm. My wife grew up on a dairy farm, and my father-in-law, farms a few hundred acres, does hay, cattle, that kind of stuff. Well, I got one brother-in-law that is getting his graduate's degree for science and nutrition and cattle. The other one is he's going to be the farmer, right? Like that's what he loves, his passion. He works for a dealership, and so for the first time last year, we had monitors and that kind of stuff in the tractors that didn't exist before.
Right.
GPS and that kind of stuff. So it's cool to see that. And my father-in-law is a great guy. Pretty tech savvy, for his age. But it was cool to see that kind of stuff in there, which 5 years ago, I said that would never happen. So it's kind of cool to see, the next generation kind of own it a little bit and start taking some of that stuff on.
And that's mass evolving too. I mean, for us old people. For our sake, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
It's just no. And what I mean by mass evolving is every 3 years,
Yeah.
it's upgrading.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Well, yeah, it wasn't that long ago
hopefully
you were
the systems are in place where you can just upgrade with the dial of a computer.
Yeah.
Without having to buy a whole new system.
Right. Well, when it wasn't that long ago, you were trying to figure out how to rewind a CD.
Exactly.
So, anyway, well, we talked a little bit. You mentioned suits,
Yes.
and I mentioned dairy.
Yes.
Another hot topic, the Fair Oaks Farm dairy video.
Yes.
You've seen it.
Yes, I've seen it.
I've seen it. It's sick.
It's rough.
It's disgusting.
It's rough.
It's horrible.
It's rough.
And I think if you look at their model, and I'm not trying to take a shot at them or anything like that. I mean, the video speaks for itself.
I I think people just need to view it for themselves.
Yeah, but the thing is, that's a very corporate, very suit-ran company by the looks of it, right? But the thing that's really irritated me about this whole thing is the media is just blown up with farmers and ranchers, beating their cattle and putting them in terrible conditions and that kind of stuff. And they're making everything like if you're a rancher, you milk cattle, instantly you're an animal abuser. Well, that's not the case. That's these guys' livelihood. And anybody that's been around any kind of cattle or anything like that understands if an animal is in stress or traumatized or anything like that, it's not going to produce at the same level as it would before.
Exactly.
A standard milk cow, for instance, 7 gallons of milk a day, right? You obviously stress that out and it doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, you're down. Therefore, moving your profits down. I think a lot of it stems from people don't understand the life and the work that goes into a farm. Are there cattle standing in shit that's deep? Sometimes, yes, you do. But that's the fact of the life of it, right? But are those cattle doctored when they're sick? Right away. Probably the owner of that cattle or that cow is going to doctor his cow before he takes himself into the doctor. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand.
I've had the opportunity to see the dairy operations, like for instance down in Southwest Kansas.
Yeah.
They have some pretty good operations, down there, and how they have them. They take really good care of their animals.
Yeah.
And so this video we're talking about does not represent the successful dairy farmers of America.
Correct.
The true dairy farmers of
Yes.
America.
Well, some of my most fond memories growing up as a kid was at my uncle's and aunt's dairy farm. They back then milked 40 to 60 head of cattle. Ironically enough, my aunt and uncle is named Jack and Coke. Not making it up. That's why they're such a good pair, evidently, because they go together.
I bet they have a lot of fun. Huh?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
A lot of laughs.
but I would go and help them every morning in the summertime before we'd go to the hayfield. So from the time I was 6 to probably 16, I'd go and help in the morning milk. And the thing is, that was their business. That was part of their business, right?
Yeah.
But every cow that came walking through that door to get milked had a name, and you could tell there were some that they liked, some that they didn't. Some much like people, animals still have a personality,
exactly.
Right? You had the ones that didn't get along very well, where they were named things like Pepsi, and you had the ones that they liked were named Cherry or Tina or something like that,
Dottie,
right? Yeah, exactly. So
of course.
So for people to just put that judgment out there that because you're a rancher or a dairy producer, that your animals aren't treated well, that's BS. And I think a lot of it is you get people that don't understand it because there's city folk. And I hate to say that and put people in a group, but they're people who don't understand what it's like to live in rural America. People that think that, hey, we're going to help the ozone by having cows not fart anymore.
Exactly.
And
then and we talk about this on a daily basis. How much the media blows this BS up.
Yeah.
And gets it in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
They get it in the wrong hands and it blows up. And then, like you said, the next thing, they don't want they don't want carts to foul anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things like, everybody wants a successful economy, right? Because that's what makes us tick and what drives our country. Well, there's about an estimated 1 billion of people who live or work on dairy farms worldwide.
Wow, I didn't know it was that big.
I mean, that's huge. You take that away.
Look at the economy. That's amazing. That just blows me away.
Yeah. Well, I think we should get into it with our next guest.
Sounds good.
We're going to go out and visit Andy Arps. He is a service manager for Platte Valley equipment. They have 4 locations here in Nebraska, one right next door kind of, and the other one a few miles away, and then there's got one north of us as well. So we're gonna go talk with him, kind of see what's shaking in the shop and
Very
that kind of
much
thing.
looking forward to chatting with him and getting his input.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
So long, farewell.
You bet.
All right,
Bye.
take care.
Stay tuned next week for part 2 of this episode where we interview Andy Arps with Platte Valley Equipment.